আপনাদের সকলকে আমি আবারও আমন্ত্রণ জানাচ্ছি আজকের ক্রিমিনাল লয়ের উপরে এই আইনি অনুষ্ঠান ক্রিমিনাল জাস্টিস প্রোগ্রাম দেখবার জন্য। আমি আজাম কো সলিসিটরস এর প্রিন্সিপাল সলিসিটর শাফিউল আজম এবং আমার সাথে আছেন দীর্ঘ 25 বছরের এক্সপেরিয়েন্সড ক্রিমিনাল লয়ের স্পেশালিস্ট ব্যারিস্টার এবং কোর্টের জাজ আমার কলিগ ব্যারিস্টার লিন টাউনলি। আমরা যে কেসের উপর বলছি সেই অসাম্প্রতিক সেই অনেক হিস্টোরিক্যাল পুরনো সেক্সুয়াল অ্যাবিউজগুলো জিমি সাবলের এগেইনস্ট হয়েছিল শতাধিক কমপ্লেনেন্ট সেই বহুল প্রচারিত জিমি সাবল কেসের উপরে। লিন, in 2008 Jimmy Savile started legal proceedings against the newspaper.
Yes, well, what happened, there had been a link made between him and abuse at a children's home in Jersey that was made by a national newspaper, and he brought proceedings. In 2009, he was interviewed under caution, which means that, you know, the police had an allegation that they were looking into seriously, and there was an allegation in relation to the Duncroft School. So that was the girls' school in Surrey where he used to volunteer and he used to visit. Now, at that stage, it was reviewed by the prosecution authorities, and they felt there was insufficient evidence at that stage. At that point, and again, it's interesting because it shows that the extent of his offending is very, very different, and that is actually really unusual as a profile for a sex offender, or relatively unusual. There was another allegation at this point made by a 43-year-old woman who said she was sexually assaulted by Jimmy Savile on a train journey between Leeds and London. So this is an example. It's a different type of offending. You know, this is opportunist in a public place on a woman in middle age. So there's very different types of abuse going on. There's abuse within institutions, abuse of young children, boys, male and female, but also, you know, females of older ages. So very, very wide pattern and type of abuse going on here.
And the girls' school, hospital, all over.
Yes, well, it's all over, but it was in institutions, which, okay, he's using his position there to enable him to abuse, but he then carries out random assaults when he's on public transport, you know, on adults in their 40s, which is very strange. There's just all types of abuse. It's not one type of sexual abuse. It's some of it is planned, some of it is random, some of it is opportunistic. You know, it's on both sexes and it's on people of all ages, which is very unusual. So the actual scandal then, after the police had done initial investigations, the scandal itself didn't break until 2011, and Jimmy Savile passed away in October of that year. And it wasn't until early November, so just after his death, that the BBC actually did research with finding some of the pupils at Duncroft School, which was the girls' school where he volunteered in Surrey, And at this stage, it started to become apparent that the abuse was widespread, and it was Newsnight that started to look into what had happened at Duncroft.
So he died in October 2012, 2011.
Yes. Yeah. And it was, in November, the BBC still aired a tribute to him.
Yeah.
This was literally just as things started to come out. And then on the 1st of December, Newsnight basically continued to work on investigating the story, and there was some pullback from the BBC at that stage, because by this stage the prosecuting authority were involved as well. And there was some, toing and froing at the beginning of December of 2011, and it wasn't until then, the 5th of December, that Surrey Police actually came out and confirmed that they were investigating a historic allegation of indecent assault from the 1970s at the Dunstan School in Surrey, and they confirmed at that stage they'd referred the matter to the CPS.
Yeah.
But again, at that stage, the CPS then said that they didn't have sufficient evidence at that point to pursue a prosecution.
And at that time, in December, meaning that he died already, isn't it? That he died in
November. Yeah.
October. He died in November 2011. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So the allegations were just coming to the fore about the Dunstan School, and they were being investigated and referred on to the prosecuting authority for a decision about whether to prosecute. And at that stage, a decision was taken that there wasn't sufficient evidence to prosecute. And again, that's not uncommon in cases of historical sexual abuse, because it's actually a very difficult charge to prove, because time has moved on and, memories are not as they should be. And it's very difficult to reach a criminal standard.
Yeah.
But the problem was, the problem was at that stage that the police who were investigating the Dunstan School matter in Surrey were not aware of all the other allegations that had been made elsewhere.
Because of 14 police inquiries across the country.
Yes, there were, but at that stage, the police were not necessarily aware that Savile was being investigated by other police forces, and that was part of the difficulty in mounting the prosecution, because the victims were afraid to make an allegation or to go ahead with an allegation against such a famous and well-loved person. But if the victims had been aware that actually there were other allegations, it may have given them the confidence to go ahead, which they didn't have. So that was impeding most of the investigations, even the ones before 2011, because there were investigations that had come to nothing before he died as well.
Yeah. And then you see that in December, the CPS informs Jones it decided not to prosecute Savile because of lack of evidence and not because of his old or infirm. So that did not prosecute him because of his old age, not for that reason.
Yes, well, it's always difficult when you have someone who is ill or old and infirm to make a decision about whether that in itself should be a reason not to prosecute. It can be a reason, but it has to be balanced against the offending as well. So, sometimes it may be taken for that decision. Other times, regardless of age and infirmity, a prosecution will go ahead. And in this case, what the prosecuting authority said was that it was a finding that there was simply not enough evidence to mount a successful prosecution, and that actually the age had not come into the decision. That was not part of the decision making because there wasn't enough evidence in any event.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about this advertisement in 2012 in the newspaper and in the Panorama special program BBC from January?
Well, in relation to what was going on in 2012, there were plans actually to have tribute shows with them, and the tribute shows were going ahead just as Newsnight wanted to air their investigations into what was alleged sexual abuse at that time. And there had been a programme that was pulled from Newsnight on BBC at short notice, just before Savile had died, to do with the abuse as well. And in February of 2012, there was a report that the investigation was pulled by the BBC, and it was an allegation because the BBC were aware that some of the abuse had taken place on BBC premises, and it was also said that the BBC had information that the police did not, and this was picked up in the national press by the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail. And then in September of that year, then the BBC was written to by ITV saying that they were going to show a documentary which basically lifted the lid about Savile's abuse and also posed questions about the fact that a lot of it had gone on when he was working at the BBC, and then we know that there were allegations made about assaults in the Top of the Pops studio and in the BBC car park. So in October, the ITV documentary was broadcast, and then the BBC, then the Director General, then responded for the first time to explain why the Newsnight investigation was dropped. And then the BBC themselves made a Panorama documentary, and it was broadcast, and that in itself then started to expose the level of the abuse and where it had occurred.
Yeah. In the Panorama program, BBC.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, in that time, there was the 2013 also things happened. What happened in that time?
Well, Scotland Yard completed its investigation into the various allegations that had been made against Jimmy Savile, and they actually said that they had found him to be, and again, unproven allegations because they never went to trial. But as far as the police were concerned, they said he was a prolific and predatory sex offender. Okay, so it's not just a paedophile, it's a sex offender.
Yeah.
Because if you remember, he's also was abusive to adults as well as children. So yes, he was a paedophile, but he was overall a sex offender as well. So Scotland Yard at that stage said that there were 214 criminal offences at that stage being investigated across 28 police forces, and the dates were not between 1955 and 2009. And 73% of the victims were children. So, I mean, it was mainly paedophilia-related offences, but, you know, quite a significant proportion, you know, 27% of his offending was on adults of all sorts of ages. And the allegations also had taken place in 14 different hospitals or medical establishments to which he had access because of his profile and his fundraising and also his volunteering at those places. And the NSPCC then conducted research in June of 2014 for a panorama programme, and they found that there were at least 500 reports of abuse by Jimmy Savile, so that's at least. So always when these things happen, generally it's the case that the matters that are reported tend to be the tip of the iceberg, because there's lots of reasons why individuals don't report sexual abuse, and it's known to be underreported as a crime. So this is likely to be a tip of a much larger iceberg, the extent of which is never going to be known, obviously, because, you know, Savile has now passed away, and actually with the process of time, a lot of the victims and his victims will have passed away or have moved on to such a stage in their life that they don't want to revisit or relive a traumatic event that happened so many years before.
And come forward to give evidence and all this stuff, yeah.
Well, yes, although, because he has died, there wouldn't be a prosecution, but they would still have to give evidence to police, as in make a statement, if they wanted the allegation to be recorded, and there would be nothing to stop them doing that. It's just they may well ask, what is the point now, because he's passed away, and there's no one left to prosecute, and secondly, it would be reliving traumatic events that they would maybe, rather not have to deal with in that type of context, because when they have to, recall the events, it has a traumatic impact.
Yes. দর্শক, এটা খুবই একটা বহুল প্রচারিত কেস। এত বেশি কমপ্লেইনেন্ট, শতাধিক কয়েকশো, তার বিরুদ্ধে সেক্সুয়াল অ্যাবিউজ, সেক্সুয়াল অ্যাসল্টের এলিগেশন এতগুলো আসছিল, এবং সেটা বিভিন্ন নিউজের মধ্যে, বিবিসিতে এবং আইটিভিতে সব জায়গায় প্রচারিত হয়েছিল। এবং ঠিক শেষ পর্যন্ত যখনই এগুলো একদম খুব হাইতে চলে গেছে, তখন সে মারা গেছে, যার জন্য তাকে কোনো ট্রায়াল ফেস করতে হয় নাই। এবং জিমি সাভল মারা গেছে। I think he was about 85 or 86 when he died, was he? I think about that sort of.
Yeah, well, you can work it out. 1926 to
26 to 2011.
11, yeah, 85, yeah.
Yeah. And then who inherited all this estate, all the wealth that he earned?
Well, his estate that was left for distribution after costs and taxes had been paid was 3.3 million. So it went, a few friends and relatives received small sums of money from his will, but the bulk of his estate went into the Jimmy Savile Charitable Trust, which he had established back in 1985. And then there was the case of his Rolls Royce, which was sold to an entrepreneur who wanted to hire it out for weddings and children's parties. And then after the scandal broke in 2011, he found that he was going to be unable to use it for those purposes for obvious reasons. But at the time of his death, it was an estimate, but it was estimate that he'd raised £40 million for different charities over the years.
দর্শক, এই ব্যক্তিত্ব সে রোলস রয়েসের মালিক ছিল, এবং তার রোলস রয়েসটা একটা মানে একজন কিনছিল, তার বিজনেস করার জন্য, ফাংশন করার জন্য, চিলড্রেন চ্যারিটির জন্য এবং পার্টিসের জন্য। কিন্তু সে তখন দেখতে পারছে যে এটা দিয়ে তার কোনো কাজ হবে না, তার ওই মানে জিমি সাবলের নামটা তাকে the only way that car will sell is to get the Sabol name of it and try to sell it for 70,000 pound, মানে if I am lucky। সে বলছিল কি যে আমাকে তার যদি সেলও করতে হয়, জিমি সাবলের যে রোলস রয়েস ছিল ওই রোলস রয়েসটা সেল করতে হলে তাকে নাম ওইখান থেকে উঠাইয়া নিতে হবে জিমি সাবলের। এবং সে বলছিল কি যদি আমি 70,000 পাউন্ড দিয়ে সেল করতে পারি তাহলে আমি খুবই লাকি হব। এবং তার যে বিভিন্ন ওয়েলথ যেগুলো ছিল ওগুলা বিভিন্ন চ্যারিটেবল ট্রাস্টের মধ্যে গেছে, কিছু তার আত্মীয় স্বজনরা পেয়েছে, এটা আমরা শুনছেন। আমরা আরেকটা শর্ট ব্রেকে যাচ্ছি, ব্রেকের পরে আরো কয়েকটা পয়েন্টের উপরে এই জিমি সাবল কেসের উপর কথা বলবো আমি এবং আমার কলিগ ব্যারিস্টার লিন টাউনলি। সবাই আমাদের সাথেই থাকুন, আমরা নেক্সট সেগমেন্টে এই জিমি সাবল কেসের উপর কন্টিনিউ করবো।